So these are some things that you've seen already. The horizontal barrel tumblers. These are probably the most common barrel tumblers that exist. So one of those look familiar, right? That's similar to the one you made. The middle one is this one, and then the little one is the one that we have to send out to you to look to see.
That's that plastic.
Those little plastic barrels. Mm-hmm. So they're called horizontal barrels because they are on horizontal axis where the tilting unit isn't. There are basically three styles. There's tabletop, benchtop, and floor. All right, we would call this a bench, that a table, because they literally end up on some lab guy's table for the most part. All three, and there's three grades of machines really: hobbyist, industrial, and heavy duty. All right. There's a lot of garbage, Harbor Freight garbage and stuff like that out there. You know, the machine, there's no energy in the machine. People don't understand why it's working. Those are typically the hobbyist ones. We deal more with the industrial and heavy duty stuff. This would be considered heavy duty. The advantages of barrel tumblers are they're ideal for very aggressive tumbling. So if you have the round edges, knock off slag, it's better than that. This is better for more surface finishing, polishing, delicate parts. This is better when you have the ability to really bang up the part a little bit. It's more effective with the action there. And this, you can actually adjust the action a few different ways. You can lower your media, lower your water, speed it up, and that'll all give you different finishes. That's part of the art of figuring out what your process is. Like I said, they're ideal for part-on-part tumbling. You can't really part-on-part tumble in these. It's not effective or efficient. You tear up the lining. So barrel tumbling can also be done wet or dry, so we're gonna go into that. So typically, it's a wet process. You put in your tumbling media, your water, your compound, your parts, and you go to town. There's huge benefits to that. Sometimes you can't use water. You have to do it what's called dry finishing. So that's where some of this other stuff comes into play, the wood pegs, creams, abrasive grits, stuff like that. So we'll go into more of that later.
How often, yesterday you showed an example of putting those two wet parts together and how they were like suctioned together. How often does that happen? Where a part, you put them in separate, you put in all the media, but then they'll,
Those
how often you have to check it?
Probably almost any batch. If you don't put an additive, you can put an additive in there that will break that up. It breaks up the surface tension. You put in it's a real fine plastic or glass bead that if you just put a little bit in there, that helps that. But whenever you really have those flat parts with the wet system, you expect some nesting. And that's where the dry polishing comes and the dry finishing comes in really nice because you won't get that with dry finishing.
So if you have,
it's really the water tension that causes it.
Right. So if you have that wet process, is it an expectation that you're going to have to manually check it after a certain period of time to make sure nothing came together, or is that rare that happens?
Well, there's a couple of things you can do to try to prevent that. And sometimes depending on the part, you might need to either increase the media to parts ratio. So instead of doing 3-to-1, you might do 5-to-1 or 6-to-1, which means you can run less parts per batch. Or you can add in glass bead, which have a tendency to get in the way, like they'll get in between the parts and prevent them from really, I think I gave the parts to you, they were stuck together.
Yeah, they were hard to separate.
Yeah.
Slide.
Right.
So if I'm a shop manager and I put something in there, am I saying to my guys, listen, every 2 hours, I want you to go check this, or the additive is in there, we're good, just wait till the batch is done.
Once you get it set up, and initially you might need to do that, but once you get the process set,
then you probably shouldn't have to do it. Kind of.
Because if you think about it, like you're only finishing half the part on that one, right? So the parts that are made it together,
right? Sure,
they're not getting finished. So it is it's an issue with the wet.
Gotcha.
And that brings up, it's a good point I was thinking about, because what you said about Bosch and Lom having one after another set up, right? There's 160 hours in a week, right? We all know that, we work most of them probably. But if you have a night shift doing nothing but tumbling, so it's ready for the morning shift, and nesting's a problem, that's even more important to have the formula and the ingredients correct on what you're talking about in the database that you guys are working on.
Absolutely.
That can be pivotal.
So being able to save, like we were talking yesterday, being able to save these formulas so that you can go back and say, okay, in this particular part, we need to change the normal process so that we're doing it this way.
Absolute differentiator.
So you don't run it all night and find out in the morning like, oh, crap, this stuff's not ready.
That it becomes built-in intelligence and it's fixed for you. It's preventable maintenance without even doing
it. Just becomes institutional memory. Yep. There's a bunch of disadvantages of working with barrel tumblers. Loading and unloading is an issue. So this is a small barrel, but if you were to put the media and the parts in here, in order to get the media and the parts out, you got to dump the whole thing out or most of it out, or you got to reach in there and kind of dig around to find it, and that can be a challenge. Because oftentimes you need to load and unload like that, it can be a messy process. You don't have the ability. You gotta dump the stuff into a pan or onto a screen or something like that, and it can be messy. Barrel tumbling is typically longer cycle times than vibratory tumbling, even though both are tumbling actions. So that's the same thing. With the vibratory, as it's tumbling, it's also vibrating, so you're getting even more action against the parts. So in a deburring process, you typically will see shorter cycle times with a vibratory machine. Barrel tumbling, by definition, is a batch process. You can't process parts in and out of a barrel. You got to put everything in, let it tumble, and then you're done. So there's no option for a continuous kind of a process. And with barrel tumbling, you're only able to really use about 50 to 60% of that stated capacity of the machine, because you need room for everything to tumble around. Whereas in a vibe, that's a different situation.
This barrel here just so you see perspective size, is that one.
Yeah.
And that big barrel would take up the whole thing.
Right.
So we're talking that big.
Yeah.
Because even if you don't have the perfect media, it might be the wrong size. You can get a good general idea of what the finish will be from it. Or if you're trying to get into certain areas, you can see, so you can back in a little bit to have all these medias and try to fight. You'll drive yourself crazy and you'll have to try.
So for aluminum, you know from experience, these 25 are the best.
Yep.
Steel, it's this. I guess you do titanium probably.
So different materials typically will first identify what type of media. So a ceramic versus a plastic versus a synthetic or something like that. And then the size and shape and the geometry of the part will start to determine what shape of media, whether a triangular shape or a cylinder shape or whatever. And then the finish that they're trying to get and how heavy the burrs might be or how much edge rounding they want will start to determine what kind of, or how aggressive or not aggressive a media they need. We'll get a little bit more about that in a few minutes.
What's the biggest part?
The biggest part you can run?
Yeah.
So some of these tubs that we have, and I can show on the website, you can run parts that are probably 3 foot by 3 foot by 10 feet long.
No.
Yeah.
You're only going to run one of those at a time.